An old man of God said, "I've been thinking, if God, when he created the world, had created no creatures in it, and if he had filled it full of millet seed from east to west and from earth to heaven, and if then he had created one bird and bidden it to eat one grain of this millet every 1,000 years, and if after that he created a man and had kindled in his heart this mystic longing, and had told him that he would never win to his goal of union with God until this bird had left not a single millet seed in the whole world, and that he would continue until then in this burning pain of love. I've been thinking it would still be a thing soon ended." In reading about the Desert Fathers, I came across, "Except a man shall say in his heart, 'I alone and God are in this world,' he shall not find peace." Unless you first amend your life going to and fro among men, you will not amend it dwelling alone. Yet because love endures all things, tell me, I pray thee, how fares the human race? If new roofs be risen in the ancient cities, whose empire is it that now sways the world, and if any still survive, snared in the error of the demons, so is he who abides in the midst of men. Because of the turbulence he sees not his sins, but when he has been quiet, above all in solitude, then does he recognize his own fault. When the king of Kerman sought the saint's daughter in marriage, the saint requested 3 days' grace before giving his answer. During those days he sought amongst the dervishes, the seekers of God, ones who had renounced the world, a suitable husband for his daughter. So he went from mosque to mosque over the days, until at last he saw a dervish earnestly praying. He waited patiently until the dervish had finished his prayers, and then asked him, "Dervish, do you have any family?" "No," replied the dervish. "Do you want a wife who can recite the Quran?" "Who is there who will give such a wife to me?" said the dervish. "All I possess is 3 dirhams." "I will give you my daughter," said the saint. "And of the 3 dirhams you possess, spend 1 on bread and 1 on attar of roses. Then tie the marriage knot." They agreed accordingly. That same night, the saint sent his daughter to the dervish's house. On entering the dervish's house, the girl saw some dry bread beside a jug of water. "What is this bread?" she demanded. "It is left over from yesterday, and I kept it for tonight." The dervish replied, Thereupon the girl turned to leave the house. I knew, said the dervish, that the daughter of the saint would never be able to live with me and put up with my poverty. Sir, it is not because of your lack of means that I am leaving you, replied the girl. I am leaving because of your lack of faith and trust, in that you set aside bread from yesterday, not relying on God's provision for the morrow. At the same time, I'm surprised at my father. For 20 years, he has kept me at home, always saying, I will give you to a God-fearing man. Now he has given me to a fellow who does not rely on God for his daily bread. The dervish asked, is there any atonement for this sin? Yes, said the girl. The atonement is that only one of the two remains in this house, myself or the dry bread. Meditation creates peace, not love. Thinking brings about love when done continually and deeply. In meditation, you try to stop thinking. The stoppage gives peace, but to love you must think of the beloved. If your mind becomes still, your beloved does not exist anymore. Then how can there be love when there is no beloved? When you meditate, you try to forget everything, even yourself. In loving, you forget everything and self, but you remember the beloved. The head man of the village was worthy of monastic fellowship, according to the man of God who was seeking such people. I shall speak of those things, and the head man, because it was a man of God that asked, said, I shall speak of those things that I am wont to do, set as I am in the midst of men. It is now 30 years since the bond of continence was agreed between my wife and I, and no man knows of it. I have had by her 3 sons. For them only have I known my wife, not any other. I have never ceased.
That's okay.
Glasses. I have never ceased to entertain strangers, set them well on their journey, given to the poor, in dispensing justice, and have not favoured my own son, not allowing the strong to dominate the weak. Endeavoured to settle disputes, to establish peace, sought that no one should be sad because of me. Thus has my life been lived. And accordingly urged to leave all and follow him. That is, the saint said. The man did so immediately and spent the remainder of his life in the desert in prayer and fasting. A man of God, again in the desert, allows another man of God alone of a cell until he finds one of his own. The newcomer attracts many of the young monks to come to him, and the owner of the cell grows jealous and resentful and sends his chief disciple to get him to leave. Each time the disciple does not convey what his master has said to convey. And in the end, the owner sets off to forcibly evact him.
Yeah.
And the disciple goes first and arranges that the owner be met with extreme gratitude. The disciple so loved his abbot that he feared the abbot would lose all his holy labours which he had wrought since youth. Barber has said, in lust there is an accentuation of separateness and suffering, while in love there is the feeling of unity and joy. Lust is dissipation, love is restoration. Lust is the craving of the senses, love is the expression of the spirit. Lust seeks fulfillment, but love experiences fulfillment. In lust there is excitement, and in love there's tranquility. In his youth, a certain lovely woman offered herself to the saint, the man of God, and he refused. Sometime later, learning that he was in a garden, she again approached him, and upon becoming aware of her approach, the saint fled. She ran after him, and he climbed the wall of the garden and departed. Now, one day in his old age, the saint was reviewing his life and suddenly remembered that incident with the woman. As he reviewed the circumstances, the thought came to him, would it have mattered if I had satisfied that woman's wish? I was young and could have repented afterwards. He was immediately filled with anguish that he should have had such a thought, thinking, how could this have happened in his old age, after so many years of struggle over his desires? How could he now repine over a sin not committed? For 3 days he sat in mourning for this thought. Then he dreamt that the prophet came to him and comforted him, saying, do not grieve. The thought was not a lapse on your part. It occurred to you because 40 more years have passed since my passing. Thus, the period of my departing the world has become that much longer, and so I have withdrawn further away. Your experience was due to that, not to any shortcoming in your spiritual status and progress. Barber has said it is love that gives meaning and value to all the happenings in the world of duality. But while love gives meaning to the world of duality, it is at the same time a standing challenge to duality. As love gathers strength, it generates creative restlessness and becomes the main driving power of that spiritual dynamic, which ultimately succeeds in restoring to consciousness the original unity of being.
Beautiful.
Tulsidas, famous throughout India as a poet saint who lived some centuries ago, grew up with an intense love for God, particularly in his advent as Krishna. As a young man, he married and loved his wife with the same fervour that he experienced in his love for God. She conceived, and as was the custom, She returned to her mother, quite some distance away, to assist in the birth. Tulsidas felt her absence keenly, and as time went on, missed her more and more intensely. In the midst of this longing, there was a most horrendous storm over the land where he and his wife dwelt. And with this he could no longer bear the separation. He set off, ignoring the extreme difficulties. The river was a raging torrent that he had to cross, but he did not hesitate. Midway on the point of drowning, what he thought was a log of wood passed, and he grasped and with this support reached the other bank. The log was actually a dead body swept away by the flood. Finally, in the heavy darkness of night, he reached the home of his wife's parents. He knew the upper room where his wife would be, but without disturbing the household, how to reach the room. Then he perceived what he thought was a rope hanging from her window, and grasping it, he climbed the window and into the room. In doing so, he realized that the rope was in fact a snake. When he stood before his wife, in a pitiful state from his journey, she lovingly looked upon him and said, "Such a love that you have shown should be devoted solely to God." In that moment, Tulsidas turned fully to God in realization of the purpose of his life and remained steady. So for the rest of his life, he wandered the north of India, composing and singing songs of love for God, and in so doing, turned the hearts of many to God, inspired by the purity and intensity of his love for his beloved God in the form of Krishna. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.